Hello folks. In this video I will give you evidence that the Gospels were probably written even earlier than scholars claim today. In this video we look at the Gospel of Luke. First, let's take a look at what the majority of university theologians claim. The Gospels of the New Testament were written between about 65 AD and 100 AD. The Gospel of Mark was written around 65 to 75 AD. The Gospel of Matthew was written around 80 to 90 AD. The Gospel of Luke was written around 80 to 90 AD. The Gospel of John was written around 90 to 100 AD. First a question, why does no one date the Gospels far before 70 AD? Because Jesus prophesied the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. In 3 of the 4 Gospels. But theologians are of the opinion that Jesus could not have prophesied this. So these words must have been put into his mouth. Logically, this means that the Gospels must have been written after 70 AD. This has nothing to do with science. Many theologians are not guided by facts but by their atheism. They interpret the Bible on the premise that there can be no God who can work miracles. It can be proven that the Gospel of Luke was written about 10 years before the year 70. Anyone who compares the introduction to the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles will realize that these two books belong together. Both were written by Luke to a man named Theophilus. And in the introduction to Acts it becomes clear that Luke wrote his Gospel to this Theophilus first. In Acts chapter 1, Luke calls his Gospel the first account. The second account is the Acts of the Apostles. And here it comes, since we know 100% that Luke wrote his Gospel before Acts, we can say that Luke's Gospel must have been written before the year 62 AD. Why? We know that the Acts of the Apostles was written in 62 AD. How can we know that? Quite simply. The Acts of the Apostles ends with Luke telling us how Paul was taken to Rome as a prisoner, how he lived there for 2 years in a rented apartment and preached the gospel there. Luke does not tell us how the story of Paul ends. He does not tell us how the Roman imperial trial against Paul ended. He does not tell us that Paul was released again and later executed for his faith. Why does Luke not tell us that? Some theologians say that Luke is not interested in it, but that does not make sense. He reports so much detail about Paul's life, and then he suddenly left it out? He simply did not mention his martyrdom? That is simply not convincing. Especially since he reports so much detail about the martyrdom of a simple disciple named Stephen. And when it comes to the great apostle Paul, he simply leaves out that he died for the gospel? Luke does not mention it because he does not know anything about it yet, as it had not happened at that point. Luke writes the Acts of the Apostles exactly when Paul has been a prisoner in Rome for 2 years, and the exact time can be calculated based on the chronology of the Acts of the Apostles. It is the year 62 AD. And therefore we can clearly say that the Gospel was written before the year 62 AD. And there are indications that Luke wrote the Gospel about 2 to 3 years before the Acts of the Apostles. In other words, Luke writes his Gospel less than 30 years after the resurrection. The vast majority of eyewitnesses were still alive then. He was therefore able to base his Gospel on eyewitness accounts. And above all, he could not just claim anything. The eyewitnesses would have contradicted him immediately. If you like the video, subscribe and activate the bell.